Thus, we've described the pattern of what usually happens, as well as the three principles of yoga. I'd like to remind you that without these three principles, you will not get results either in Yoga of Higher Love or Tantra Yoga or Yoga of the Union. It is quite a categorical statement, but it is what it is. After these fundamental things, the analysis of your own unique situation begins. Here we can talk about a typical scenario that arises depending on the place and time you live in. If we talk about Moscow in 2009, there will be one scenario. If it is a medieval India, there will be another one. People of some other country in the future will act according to a scenario typical for their time and place. Why? Because any scenario is our karma. The fact that we live approximately in the same place, share approximately the same views, and do approximately the same things suggests that we have approximately the same background or pretty much the same karma. We would have never gotten together if we had had different karmas. Therefore, we usually observe situations typical of the people surrounding us. You've probably seen it many times in your life. A guy meets a girl and they fall in love with each other. First they date and then they get married and live together for some time. And here we go, they got divorced. Such a pattern keeps repeating again and again. If others find themselves in such a situation, why do you think that you cannot get into a similar situation? You can. Thus, it is a good idea to realize that this scenario is also possible in your life and formulate the most reasonable way of acting if this happens. Maybe it does make sense to check each other's feelings first before calling each other the one. But you remember that you can prepare yourself either before higher love comes or when it has already gone. If higher love starts fading away, or when you're still in love with someone but there is no response, maybe it's not a very good idea to blame that someone and make his life miserable if you understand that you are in love not with the person, but with the absolute that shines through that person. Maybe you shouldn't be that demanding the games of our karma when higher love is about to begin. The same is true when you fall in love with someone knowing already that someone is a window to the absolute. You should understand that if you don't act carefully with that person, this whole magic disappears right away like a snowflake on your palm. It is so beautiful. A split second and it turns into a shapeless water drop on your palm. Like higher love. That is why, if you fall in love with someone, try to handle your negative way of thinking and your negative tendencies so they don't destroy everything. If you start having sex with someone you are in love with, then you should definitely do it from the standpoint of yoga of the union, with as little loss of your vitality as possible. Otherwise, you will have nothing to compensate for your ghastly karma when, for a split second, a beast wakes up in you and destroys this miracle. If you don't know the person that well yet, maybe you shouldn't throw yourself at him right away. Moreover, maybe you shouldn't make inquiries about that person. It is such a typical situation. Let's say you fall in love with a girl, and a window to the enlightenment opens for you. The less you know about her background and how many guys she had before you, the fewer chances you will have to start thinking about her not as a window to the enlightenment, but as a regular girl. Thus, we provoke our minds to slide back down to the ordinary way of thinking. Why? Because the whole world will urge you to do it. Vice versa, it might also be a bad idea to ask your friend's opinion or go to see a palm reader when you fall in love. Please don't do this. The state of higher love happens when there is one and the other. There is no third wheel. You get it, right? The third one doesn't belong here. And this third one doesn't necessarily have to be a person. It can be just a thought or anything else. We usually tend to find out as much as we can. However, an attempt to find out as much as possible about the girl we are in love with doesn't get us closer to her. Instead, we get further from her. A while back, I started doing one thing. I don't always have a chance to stick to it, but anyhow. If I find a piece of art, music, or movie that I like, I try to avoid knowing anything about the author. I'd like to know nothing about scandals or rumors associated with him, except anything that describes him as an artist. Why? Because everything the author wanted to say isn't his art. I'm not interested in other information like where he grew up and lived, or what he has recently been up to. All the rumors, all the gossips start setting my mind, not for his art, but the worms of our consciousness fussing about all this. It is so unpleasant, and I want to get rid of it. Here is a chance to not think about it and not get into this swirl of negativity and ugly squabbling. The less I know about it, the bigger the chance that I won't shut this window. It may sound strange, however. The less we want to know about the object of higher love, the longer we are in love with it. If we start finding things out about him or her too actively, we tempt our negative karma to make us turn into a beast that destroys everything. By the way, we will be destroying everything with our own hands. Moving on. How fast should we get closer to the object of higher love? It is clear that if we find ourselves in bed with the object of our higher love too soon, especially if we've never learned anything about yoga of the union, as a rule, we destroy higher love with this sex. Therefore, we should move forward at a certain pace, not too fast, but not too slow either, because taking too much time may start gradually destroying higher love as well. Thus, we need to tune into a certain harmony of communication with the highest. Obviously, each case is individual and there are no universal rules. Everyone has their own background. But there should be a general understanding that higher love is a gift from above, and that everything secular has nothing in common with it, or that inappropriate use of that secular destroys higher love. This is the main idea yoga of higher love practices are rooted in, so that we don't destroy higher love with one careless movement. Notice how many stories have been written about great love where a young man falls in love with a young girl, and then the young man goes far away to the edge of the world. The young girl who's in love keeps waiting for him for 40 years. They meet each other again when they are old. She's been in love with him for all these years. If the same young girl and the same young man had lived together for at least a few years and were close to each other, there is a good chance that they would have provoked their negative karma and their higher love would have disappeared after a few months. There should be a pearl of inner wisdom within us. But how does one find it? Yoga of Higher Love gives us a very particular piece of advice. It is impossible to lose with if you keep it in mind. Never forget, even for a split second, that you are in love with the Absolute. Even if the object of your higher love is not physically next to you, he is still with you in the form of the whole universe. And when you communicate with him, you behave the way you would if you were communicating with the Absolute. Here's an example. If you ever find yourself talking to a Maharaja or a president, willingly or unwillingly, you will pull yourself together and act cautiously. Willingly or unwillingly, you will feel that someone very respectable and dignified is in front of you. As a result, you won't allow some of your negative tendencies like rudeness, discourtesy, whining or bad mood, hot temper, apathy, passivity, or foolishness to reveal themselves. Instead, you will get it together, become focused, and try to make a good impression. But if you come home and your wife, who you've known for 40 years, is there and the feelings are gone, you could pull yourself together and it wouldn't be a problem for you. But instead, here you are losing your face and revealing your ghastly karma by turning into a jerk. No doubt, it starts destroying her love. As a matter of fact, it has destroyed it already. Thus, it makes sense to develop a strategy of communicating with your partner where you gather yourself up and stay tactful. There should be a sturdy frame that keeps you in shape. The more you act this way and remain in this state, the longer higher love will stay with you. You simply will not let your negative karma destroy it. It is called being well mannered. However, the downside of it is that it can also strongly affect you. In some cases, your karma makes you stay too close with your partner. Let's say you're already married and live in a studio apartment together with other relatives of yours. And all you have for both of you is a tiny piece of corner separated from the rest of the apartment. Plus, it is a very old apartment with cardboard walls, and you can hear all your neighbors talking about above, below, and behind the wall. In a word, just perfect conditions to practice yoga of higher love. Obviously, you will start overheating. Just imagine you have these stressors on your attention 24/7. On one hand, it protects your higher love, but on the other hand, you overstress all the internal structures of your body. You won't last for long. Therefore, you have to apply the second principle of yoga and find ways to communicate with the object of your higher love or with the absolute not through the body of your partner, but directly through the universe. In other words, every so often you go to a forest by yourself and talk to the Absolute or your wife, who you are in love with. Thus, you communicate with her or the Absolute not through her body, because her body needs rest as well as yours, but through the entire universe. You think about her, but you are not physically together. You give the physical structures you've been keeping in shape some time to relax and rest. Pretty much the same happens when someone goes away for some time. Short separations only strengthen higher love, or at least they don't let higher love disappear that fast. However, such an approach should be reasonable. It may be a little too much if you sail away for 5 years. That is why you should always stick to your own rhythm. As a matter of fact, all happy people who were truly in love for a very long time and the higher love they had gradually turned into love over time, as a rule, were able to find such shifts in their activity when they, let's say, switched their focus to their job. Imagine you have an interesting job and you communicate with your husband or wife through the project you work on or the activity you are involved in. Let's say you are a yard keeper and you communicate with your beloved through the rushing noise of the leaves and every single swish of your broom. She's the only one for you. There is no one else. Thus, such shifts while communicating with your partner at the highest level slow the process of losing higher love down to a certain extent. This is a very practical advice. There is one more practical tip worth mentioning. You should keep in mind that you may lose higher love again. It is not up to you. But what you can do is build such a relationship with the person you were in love with that eventually you transform higher love into stable and lasting love. Because if your love is stable and lasting, you will be able to live with that person in marriage. If on top of everything, your partner trusts you and you practice the triad together, he or she will never be jealous when you are involved in tantric sexual practices with other partners. Thus, he or she will give you a chance to get rid of all your negative karma, and you may not lose this fantastic feeling towards each other again if it reveals itself for the second time in the future. If instead of love, your higher love grows into estrangement and lack of respect for each other, there's no doubt you will break up with that person. And someone else may appear in your life. This someone else may appear in your life without higher love. However, the person you were in love with will remain priority for you. Why? Because together you will have better chances to get through the second stage of yoga of higher love. This second stage of Yoga of Higher Love is a stage of serious work. It is a very serious stage. It is the stage of real practice with your body and everything around you. It is the perfect time to practice all other types of yoga that have ever existed. The triad goes without saying. You will need some sort of a margin of safety to be able to withstand the long journey of the second stage of Yoga of Higher Love. It will be easier for you to do it if you have an opportunity, at least mentally, to return to the stage when you both were madly in love with each other. This will turn into your inner core that will help you cope with all difficulties. Nevertheless, the second stage of Yoga of Higher Love is considered one of the happiest stages if we talk about happiness as something not of supreme logic but everyday normalcy. Our idea of happiness and the possibility of it, if we do not consider the state of being in love, is most strongly realized during the second stage of Yoga of Higher Love. At this point, there is an explanation that everything is karmic. If we once pictured happiness, but happiness without being in love, then before higher love comes, we first must exhaust all our karma, both negative and positive. Therefore, sometimes the second stage of Yoga of Higher Love is just a fulfillment of our own desires that we wished for ourselves earlier. I'd like to have a family and children. I will love my husband and I want my husband to love me, and so on and so forth. Strangely enough, sometimes when we picture our happiness, we do it relating ourselves to what we can understand. Since we still cannot fully understand higher love, especially if we have never experienced it, we tend to leave it out. It sort of should be in our lives, but we keep it for later. Thus, first we will have to experience all of the positive karma we once pictured for ourselves until we get bored. Then, after we fully experience the positive karma, the path that will help us to go beyond karma will open up to us. Therefore, the second stage of Yoga of Higher Love is the happiest one, if we talk about our everyday life. This is the stage of good work, creativity, and discovery. Higher love is something that is beyond this world, something breathtaking and mind blowing, like a whirlpool. It is supreme logic. However, let's get back to the methods that are worth mentioning to people who are at the second stage of Yoga of Higher Love. We've already mentioned it, but anyway, look for the company of people who are in love. Their higher love will sanctify you too. Communicate with madmen in love rather than with intelligent pragmatists. If you communicate with people in love, then reflections of supreme logic will involuntarily affect you as well. And it will help you to remember that higher love exists. Why? We all have different karma. And sometimes life winds us up a lot. Sometimes we are in such bad physical and emotional shape that our memory simply switches off and we don't remember that we ever were in love. like a little boy who dreamed of becoming an astronaut and going to space. But then he grew up, got a well paid job and a belly, and settled down, even though he is still the same person. Why did this happen? Because his everyday life, which is his karma, doesn't allow him to look up at space. Instead, he keeps looking under his feet. Thus, the slightest reminder of this original impulse sometimes helps to shake things up instead of wallowing in ignorance and quickly get rid of your negative karma. Once again, look for the company of people who are in love. Read books dedicated to higher love. Watch movies. Listen to music. You can even start with a cheesy song written by a mediocre songwriter who knows three and a half words. However, such songs copy something from someone anyway. It is a universal topic. Sometimes a songwriter writes not because he has interesting and unique ideas to express, but because a universal wave comes and he just writes everything down. But even the cheesiest songs sometimes have impulses that will make you look at the world from a different angle if you know the yoga axiomatics. You will start finding the highest meaning behind the words that seem to be used more literally. The same will be true for any work of art. If you keep being interested in it, you will never fade. Keep constantly thinking about higher love. Finally, the most helpful advice would be to help people who are in love in every possible way. If there is a way to gain positive karma, even if you currently have the worst karma ever, it is by helping the supreme logic. When higher love comes into this world, it is the arrival of the supreme logic. I cannot stress it enough. Help higher love. At the end of the day, what else can you do? To sum up, there are some methods that are general and sort of passive. However, Yoga of Higher Love has more active methods as well. I will briefly describe them now, but we will practice them later. One of the active methods is the following. The fact that you now understand at least partially what happens when someone falls in love gives you a chance to practice. Strangely enough, these practices are best described in Tantra Yoga and Yoga of the Union. In other words, all practical exercises sort of descend from the level of Yoga of Higher Love to the level of Yoga of the Union and Tantra Yoga. The point of one of the active practices is to consciously remain with the whole universe one on one and try to feel someone you are in love with when you are alone, even if you are not currently in love. In other words, if the absolute exists for you, and if it manifests itself through a girl, you will fall in love with her. But as you remember, the same absolute, before it manifests itself through a girl, is still around you every second of your life. You just don't see it. And that is why you don't focus your attention on it. Why? Because there are so many distractions around. Plus, we are used to the down to earth way of thinking that gets you sidetracked. When you try to feel the presence of that object of your love, the mere thought of which brings you an insane surge of joy, euphoria, and happiness, you should know that you are taking the first step towards meeting the absolute. As you remember, if you take a step towards the absolute, it will take a lot more steps towards you. This is sort of a message for the absolute that I'm ready, I'm waiting for you. These practices that you exercise when you are alone are the practices that mostly come from Tantra Yoga and Yoga of the Union. In addition to them, there will be other practices when you interact with your partners or your husband or wife or other like minded people who also have their minds set towards higher love in such joint practices. These practices of Tantra Yoga and Yoga of the Union can go as far as a sexual intercourse. Although there are all kinds of practices. Some of them don't go further than a certain point, while others include sexual intercourse. It doesn't really matter. What does matter is that you start visualizing the absolute with the help of your partner. Your partner becomes the concentration point of all your efforts and visualizations and the vector pointed towards the absolute. Thus, your partner becomes a transmitter that intensifies your signal and sends it directly to the absolute. Ideally, if we talk about Tantra Yoga and Yoga of the Union, it should be an interaction that uses all our senses and parts of our body to the fullest extent. It can only happen if you have a sexual union with your boyfriend or girlfriend, with your partner, or your husband or wife. Let's say you have a wife, but you are not in love. You still can practice with her. There is no need to look for someone else. But if we talk about Tantra Yoga, there is a chance to compensate for this sort of artificiality of visualization, mantra chanting, and other methods only if you consistently keep doing the same practices with other partners. Otherwise, the procreation protection mechanism will ruin everything. Why? Because it is possible to compensate for the lack of the 4 and 5 aspects to a certain extent if we talk about one little practice with one partner. However, this hunger for something that is missing sooner or later will put an end to it. As a result, the practice productivity will suddenly drop. Sometimes it even reduces the practice to zero. Thus, the active methods imply that you will strive to communicate with the absolute through your partners besides your husband or wife. If you have no husband or wife, it will be just different partners. It goes without saying that your partners should not be random people who you just happened come across at some point. It is insane. They should be like minded people who share the same views, lifestyle, and so on. This is a more active way of waiting for the absolute arrival in the form of a person. Each active practice implies that you try to discover the absolute in your partner, and your partner tries to discover the absolute in you. It also implies that you attempt to make a connection with the absolute through your partner, and your partner does the same. Ideally, there should be four partners for a woman and five partners for a man. Why? Because we are talking about the law 4 and 5, four aspects of consciousness and five aspects of energy. Thus, you will have a chance to fully eliminate the negative karma in each of your aspects and prepare yourself for the absolute to manifest itself through a specific person when you will fall madly in love again. There is an observation, although it's not the absolute rule, that we tend to fall in love again with someone who has already been one of our partners. However, we can also fall in love with a total stranger. Nevertheless, if you ever were in love with someone before, but you lost that higher love, let's say you had a wife you were in love with, but then higher love was gone, the tendency is that higher love may reveal itself through someone you were in love with before. Although we cannot say anything for sure here. Why is there such a tendency? Because the channel to the highest had already existed at some point, but our negative karma destroyed it. But here you are, getting rid of your negative karma and working hard at the second stage of yoga of higher love. Of course, it is easier to take the same path if the obstacles are no longer there than to clear up a new path for yourself. But obviously, no one can guarantee you anything. Moreover, the scenarios can be absolutely different. That is why this path is not for everyone, but only for those who took this path of spiritual growth and set their main goal as reaching the highest. Why? Because even if in this life you have a wife you were in love with and your higher love is gone, you still don't remember anything that is beyond your current life. You might have been in love with a totally different person in your previous life. And that higher love might have been even stronger. You get it, right? Thus, something that is more karmically predetermined can happen. Let's say you were madly in love with someone like Romeo and Juliet in your previous life, and hopefully there was a better ending. You've also been in love with someone in this life, but this time higher love was not that strong. Obviously, as soon as you get rid of the veil of your negative karma, there are no barriers for your previous higher love to reveal itself again. In any case, if you receive this gift again, you will no longer lose it. You will move to the third stage of yoga of higher love and quickly finish here everything you have to finish. And I hope you will leave behind at least some instructions for the next generations before you go on a journey to explore the transcendental. This is how yoga lives on. Thus, I've briefly described some of the methods of yoga of higher love. There are both passive and active methods. The passive methods are about what it is better not to do or to do but using a sort of passing approach. The active methods are for when you understand that you need a higher love to reach the absolute through it and through anything else. Then the active methods of Tantra Yoga and Yoga of the Union are for you. So you can bind them all together into the triad. If you think that for some reason these methods are unacceptable for you, let's say it is unacceptable for you to have other partners except your husband and wife because other people won't understand you or something else, there are other kinds of yoga that will lead you to the same, but using different paths. Perhaps it won't be as quick, but there is no violence whatsoever. However, if something like a public opinion has an influence on you, but you still want to reach the highest absolute, you probably shouldn't take this fast road. Why? Because you still have to come unhooked from the public opinion somehow. You still have to untie some karmic knots. Trust me, a person who approaches a certain level of spiritual development cannot care less about who and what says or think about him, because the only thoughts he has in his head are about the highest. He is crazy about this idea of higher love. He is crazy about the idea of reaching the highest spiritual spheres. There are no other thoughts. However, once again, everything should come harmoniously. Someone will be approaching it slower and more naturally. Others will be moving faster and more actively. Everyone should choose their own path. Here it is, Yoga of Higher Love.